Stacey, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's 2020. There's an election going on. Yes. There's also a census going on,
yes.
And that's getting a lot less coverage. So why should people care about the census, especially young people?
The census does two things. One, it allocates $1.5 trillion every year to our communities. Okay. And two, it is used once every 10 years to allocate political power. The problem is, if you don't get counted, you don't get the money and you don't get the power. And that's a problem. We know that, for example, the expected undercount, so the number of people of color who will not be counted in the census, will cost $8.2 billion a year to their communities.
Wow.
That's money that doesn't go to schools. So if you wonder why one school looks good and the other school looks like it's from the 1950s, it's often because they undercounted the number of students in those schools. If you want to know why a really nice community seems to get better every year and a poor community seems to consistently struggle, that struggle comes about because they didn't get the resources they needed.
So how does undercounting even happen in the first place?
So the census happens once every 10 years. It started in 1790. It's one of the longest things we've ever done in America. And every 10 years, we literally count every person in the US. Not every citizen, right. Every person.
Every person living here.
Every person living here. So as of April 1st, which is known as Census Day, as well as April Fool's Day, that is the start of the census officially. Okay. And on that day, we count who's here. That count is used to then say in every community how much of the big pie of federal dollars gets divvied up and delivered.
Right.
An undercount happens when they try to do the count of the people and some people don't show up. They don't respond, they get overlooked, or they hide. And the challenge is that that happens most often with people of color, right. With immigrants, with children under the age of 5, with renters, and with rural communities.
Okay.
The consequence is that for those people in those places, they never get better because the census only happens every 10 years. So if you're not counted, for 10 years you're invisible. That invisibility has a real effect. I was talking to, so I started an organization called Fair Count. And one of the Fair Count leaders, we were talking about the consequences. There was a community that was trying to get a grocery store. They lived in a food desert. And they've been trying to get a grocery store for years. And there was access available through a federal program, but there was a threshold cut off of how many people had to live in your community. Okay. Because their community did not fully participate in the census, they missed the cutoff by 40 people. Wow. And for a decade, they were not going to qualify for this grocery store that could have changed their lives.
Right. So that's on the local government officials. And what is it that people need to do to make sure they're counted this year?
Number one, we have to not be afraid of the census. So one of the reasons those communities tend not to participate right. is that there's a fear that something will happen if you answer it. And that fear is real because in recent years, the Trump administration has done its best to scare people out of participating in the census. Right. It's to the benefit of Republicans for communities of color not to be counted, for children not to be counted. Because every person that gets counted means the resources get divided up a little bit more. But it also divides the power more. And in 2020, the number of people of color who gets counted will be the largest we've ever seen in our nation. Wow. But that also means the political power will be different than it's ever been before. And the last time we didn't pay attention, we ended up with the Tea Party taking over state legislatures and taking over the US Congress. Right. This time, what we need to do is, number one, don't be afraid of the census. If you have a cell phone or a light bill, they already know how to find you. Okay. Your job is to make sure you respond. This year, 80% of the census will be done online.
Oh, wow.
And that's unusual. It's never happened before. Yeah. And it's even more problematic because the Trump administration has underfunded the testing of the technology. Right. Surprise. The last time we had a federal program where we didn't fully test the technology, things didn't go so well. The difference was the Obama administration wanted the Affordable Care Act to work. The Trump administration does not want the census to work because they know that if the census is undercounted, the people they like best will get more and everyone else will not. Right. And so we need people to respond to the census. You'll get a letter in March and then you'll get a follow-up letter and then you might get a call. Respond to the census. Okay. Turn in your information. Okay. Number two, we need people to recognize that when you turn in your information, they cannot use it to hurt you. The citizenship question, which a lot of people heard about last year, was designed to scare not only immigrants, but their families from participating, especially if they were undocumented. Well, the reality is it's against the law. It is a federal law that will amount to 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine for every person's information that gets revealed. And since 1790, no one has ever broken this law. And it's unlikely they're going to try now.
We do have an unprecedented administration.
We do. So here's the thing I would say.
Yeah.
If you fill out the census online, if you do it by phone, if you do it by mail, then you're done. Because what happens is if people don't answer the census in April and May, they start to send people to your door.
Right.
If you answer the census online, if you answer it on paper, they won't come to your door.
You can avoid that, okay.
But the third piece to think about, and this is why I'm so excited about the work we're doing through Fair Count, which is the organization I started, is that it's an opportunity for us to show who we are and where we are. Political power is allocated through redistricting. That's when they draw the political lines. A lot of folks have heard about gerrymandering. Yeah. Gerrymandering is when you draw the lines for political gain to give politicians who they want instead of giving people the leadership they need.
Right.
The problem is that the Supreme Court in 2019 said it's okay to draw the lines to benefit Republicans or Democrats.
Right.
But the only thing they still can't do is racial gerrymandering, meaning they can't try to put all the people of color in one place so everyone else gets to vote.
Right.
And they can't divide you up so you can't coalition together. But racial gerrymandering can only be stopped if we answer the census. We have to know where people are. We have to know that they are ready to be counted. And if they're counted, then they get more political power than they've ever had before.
So is that the main connection between the census and voting rights?
That's absolutely it.
Okay.
Because it's not just Congress. We talk about congressional leadership.
Yeah.
That's great, but it's also your school board.
Right.
It's your county commission. It's your city council. It's whether they address homelessness or not.
Right.
Because the money you need for homelessness comes from the census, but also the political will to do something about it comes from the census.
So you mentioned if you have a cell phone or a light bill, so for people experiencing homelessness, how are they counted?
So there are certain populations where there is a separate program for how they're going to be counted.
Okay.
So that applies to people who live in nursing homes, anyone who is in hospice care, basically if you're long-term not in a residence. There's a special program to count the homeless. There's a special program to count those who are serving abroad.
Okay.
Now, if you live abroad, you don't get counted, but if you're serving the federal government either in military or in some other capacity, then you get counted.
Okay.
And those are all the folks who are going to get special treatment. Everyone else, we got to do it ourselves.
Right.
But I want people to think about the fact that if you are Latino and you don't get counted, if all of the Latinos who are expected not to participate don't participate, they will lose $4.4 billion a year into our communities. Right. For the African American community, it's $3.3 billion. For Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, it's $590 million, almost $600 million. For Native Americans and Native Alaskans, it's $200 million every year. Wow. Those are real dollars. If you've gone into a school classroom and you've seen the books they have, and you wonder why don't these kids have better books, guess whether they got counted or not. More than likely they didn't, and therefore they get less. I think about it this way. If you get invited to a party and you don't RSVP, and then you show up anyway, you're probably going to get the bologna sandwich and the worst seat.
Right.
But if you RSVP, if we answer the census, then we get to be at the party just like everybody else, and that's the mission.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it. So the results of your 2018 race are still being litigated in the courts. We talked about some voter suppression. There are various ways, the long lines, the purges from the rolls. What do people need to know about what's going on right now?
So we are in the midst of litigation.
Yeah.
We sued the state of Georgia. When I did my non-concession speech, I said, yes, the legal sufficiency of his numbers, but the law itself was not legitimate. Right. The system isn't legitimate. And we filed a lawsuit. But lawsuits take time. We are now in the process called discovery, and that's when we get to get information from them, they get to get information from us, we find our experts, they find their experts, and our hope is that we will be in trial by the spring. Okay.
So what's going to happen? If, it will still be going on, maybe even as we go into the fall, possibly, with the election?
It likely will.
Okay.
Well, I don't know, but here's what we need to remember. Part of lawsuits is that we want the verdict, we want the answer.
Yeah.
But the other part is that we want the questions asked. We want the information. Right. We want to know what happened. Right. Because right now, what we know is what we could find. But because of depositions, because of the lawsuit, we get to ask the people in charge what they did and why they did it.
Right.
And sometimes that has almost as much of an effect, because you can't fight an enemy you can't see. And voter suppression works best by being invisible. It looks like user error. It looks like administrative rules. But these are real people and real lives. And for me, the lawsuit, the process is almost as important as the outcome.
Right. The Georgia primary, presidential primary, is March 24th.
It is.
And the voter registration deadline is a month before that, I think.
It is.
So there's been a lot of talk about Iowa and New Hampshire, both because of the mess and because they're overwhelmingly white states.
Yes.
So what's your view of maybe how we should reorganize the primary so that voters of color and black voters especially get more of a say in the beginning of the race?
So let's separate these two things out.
Okay.
The challenge for the Iowa caucus was that the system is broken.
Yeah.
And we have to give, as much as the app was, targeted as the problem, the same thing happened to Mitt Romney and Rick Santorum in 2012.
Yeah.
The caucus system is a flawed system.
Yes.
And you can't blame someone for breaking something that was already broken.
Okay.
I don't. And I think while we should feel badly about how confusing it was, we also need to put it into context. We've seen 2 decisions made by 2 of the smallest states in the nation. Important states because every voice matters.
Yeah.
But we've got 50 other contests that have to happen.
Exactly.
And we need those contests to actually tell the truth from the beginning.
Yeah.
And so the second part is we need a more representative sample. If we're going to put so much emphasis on the first 2 people to talk, we need to make sure that the first people who talk actually look like America.
Right.
And that's my concern about the diversity.
Right.
It's not to diminish Iowa or New Hampshire, but it's to recognize that there are communities of color that are just as vibrant, just as engaged, and deserve just as much attention. And they deserve it early on. In today's age, in today's communication, the first 2 contests seem to set the tone.
Exactly.
Although we know absolutely nothing. It's like looking at a speck of paint and saying, I know which picture this is. We have no idea.
It's 1.6% of the delegates
Yes.
that they need. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we don't know anything yet.
Yeah.
What we know is that we have elections. We have 50 plus competitions, all 50 states plus Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands,
Yeah.
Puerto Rico.
Territories, yeah.
We have territory. We have so many more people who need to be heard. The District of Columbia.
Yeah.
Hopefully one day they get to be full citizens.
Yeah.
But across this country, people need to have their voices heard. And the problem with the Iowa caucus and the New Hampshire primary taking up all of the oxygen is that there's no breath left for anyone else.
Yeah.
We need to rotate who gets to go first, and I actually think we need 4 or 5 that go first on that first day.
Yep.
I appreciate Iowa's historical legacy, I appreciate New Hampshire, but now is the time for us to reflect the values of the Democratic Party, and that means we actually have to have a democratic process.
So speaking of how it dictates sort of like media coverage, especially, as a woman who has run for office, it feels like the women presidential candidates are largely getting erased from the conversation, especially Elizabeth Warren, who is currently 3rd in the delegate race. But it seems like Amy Klobuchar is getting more attention, even though she's behind her, whatever attention she does get. So what's your view, and I know you have personal experiences with this, of how these candidates are being treated?
Part of what happens is we allow the media narrative to wash out logic.
Yes.
And it's in the media's interest. Their job is to generate clicks and eyeballs and attention.
Yeah.
And we love a good story.
Yeah.
The problem is the story has to be real. And I know in this day and age with the person occupying the White House, truth seems a little harder to come by.
Yeah.
But it's available and it's right there for us. We need people to stop prognosticating as though they can tell the future. They can't. They can only tell us what happened, and they don't have enough information to extrapolate what will happen.
Right.
And for women and people of color, it's this automatic jump to knowing the unknowable that hurts us every time. Because people believe, the pundits believe that the 1972 election, the 2008 race, that those are somehow predictive of everything that will happen. And that's just not true.
Right.
We're a different country.
Yes.
And every time we tell our future based on our past, we get ourselves in trouble because we weren't that good before. The benefit and beauty of America is that we get better every time. So let's let our process get better every time.
Yeah. One of the other sort of problems with the imbalance of the primary as it is now is that the candidates who do well with minority and black voters, they're portrayed as struggling, right? Like former Vice President Joe Biden, who polls extremely well among minority communities, has placed 4th, he's placed 5th, but in these like small states. So how do we correct that? Do you think his campaign's gonna have a chance to recover there? There's only so much we can do about media coverage, but I'm just curious to know what you think.
And what I would say is we need to ignore what we're told and do what we want. I mean, rules that any 13-year-old would love to have.
Yeah.
But America has to have it. Democrats have to have it in this primary. No one knows the answer, and therefore we have to tell the story ourselves.
Yeah.
Whether it's someone who didn't come in first out of 5 or 10, because everyone was struggling over 41 delegates in Iowa.
Exactly.
That's not going to determine the outcome of a race where you have to get almost 2,000 delegates to win.
Right.
But what we can do is say that I'm going to listen to my values. I'm going to listen to my community, and I'm going to vote my conscience. I don't care what they tell me. I'm going to do what I know is right. And every single person needs to do that, because we have a primary for a reason. The reason we have primaries is so we can hear from the people who they want to see lead them.
Right.
If we tell them who that is, then we are doing exactly the wrong thing. That's what dictatorships are.
Yeah.
And whether it's done benignly or from malice, the result is the same. When you silence people, especially communities of color, especially the disadvantaged, they start to believe that their voices aren't necessary. And if they can't be heard in a primary, why would they bother to show up in general?
Yeah. Everybody's talking about Michael Bloomberg buying all these meme accounts, and Elizabeth Warren put out a video today saying she needs money to make it through Super Tuesday. What do you make of the whole money in politics issue and the fact that billionaires can kind of come in and just spend all this money as much as they want?
So I want us to decouple something.
Okay.
Money's always been in politics.
Yeah.
What happened with Citizens United is that we've allowed more of it to pour in from other places, and those places don't have to say who they are.
Right.
But throughout American history, Michael Bloomberg has spent as much money as he wanted. So there's nothing about Citizens United or the McCain-Feingold Act that would have stopped him from spending.
Right.
I'm not a socialist, so I do not have an underlying distrust of people who have money. I have an underlying distrust of a system that allows people to accrue that much money without giving equal opportunity to anyone else who wants to pursue that type of path. And the reality is we have a poor system of capitalism that has gone away from its fundamental mission. It's unchecked and ungoverned, and yes, that is a problem. But we have to remember, money's in politics already, and it's been there for a while. The difference is on our side, we finally know where it is.
Right.
For the Republicans, it's always been dark money, and it's money that's coming from multiple corporations and from billionaires and gazillionaires. I know there aren't really gazillionaires, but it sounds good.
Yeah.
And so
To us, they might as well be.
Exactly. But for me, the reality is, I'm less concerned with how we're financing our elections than winning these elections so that we can fix the entire system.
Okay.
The notion that we can fix the system through goodwill has proven to be false. It's up to every voter to decide if they want a Bloomberg or a Biden or a Warren or a Klobuchar or a Buttigieg or whomever. It's the voter's decision, and we need to create a system where they really get information so they can make the best decision possible.
Right, that makes sense. All right, just since we're in Black History Month,
Yes.
who should we be celebrating right now? Who are your personal heroes?
So I'm going to do something that is cheesy but true.
Okay.
I celebrate the everyday Black person. I mean, survival is hard, and erasure is soul-numbing. I grew up in southern Mississippi. I live in Georgia. I was born in Wisconsin, and I've had the privilege of traveling to almost every state in this nation. And I celebrate the Black communities that don't just struggle and survive, but thrive because they don't allow themselves to be told they're not. One of the reasons I'm so excited about the work I get to do is that my job is to help restore the voice of the Black community. We know our stories, we know our struggles, but we also know our possibilities. And every person who wakes up renewed each morning, committed to better, those are the people I celebrate. And I think the ancestors who made it possible, the grandparents and grand aunts and grand uncles, but also the nieces and nephews and daughters and sons, the parents of tomorrow who make our nation stronger because we refuse to give up.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is totally off topic, but
Absolutely.
I have to ask it.
Please.
What do you think of the new Doctor?
I think the new Doctor Who is actually great.
Yeah, I think so too.
And I'm 2 episodes behind, so I haven't seen what's happening with the second Doctor.
Right.
But I am intrigued.
I know. Yes. Okay. It's so exciting. I just had to.
Oh, absolutely.
When I saw that, I was like, she is maybe the first politician I've ever heard talk about Doctor Who. I think it's amazing.
She's a fantastic doctor, and the way that I love the interplay between her and the new Doctor, the old new parallel Doctor.
Yeah.
The fact that they were arguing much in the way that they did in a lot of the specials when 2 or 3 doctors would meet up with each other about who they were.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I love the throwback.
Yeah, and I love representing women of color who are nerds. That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's a wonderful show.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I really
Thanks for having
appreciate it. So nice to meet you.